Dean Mercer hadn't slept in 32 hours. His badge still hung heavy on his chest, but it didn't mean what it used to. Not when the same kids kept disappearing and no one seemed to care. The Bureau had closed the file. The local PDs barely blinked. But Dean kept a board in his garage, strings, pins, maps, mugshots of ghosts. 14 kids, all under 10, gone from small towns that no one could point to on a map. All runaways, all forgotten. The call came in on a rainy Thursday. Block number. A whisper, almost a breath. They're still alive. And then it was gone. Dean tried protocol. He wrote it up. He routed it through his supervisor. But the response was immediate and cold. No credible source. No active case. Focus on your current assignments. He didn't. He couldn't. His gut had gotten him through 19 years of the Bureau. And his gut was screaming. So he drove, alone, out of D.C. past the lights, into roads no GPS cared about. Towns where rust grew on stop signs and post offices doubled as grocery stores. A place called Hartley Creek. Population 900. 3 missing kids in 6 months. All of them seen last near the same dirt road. Dean parked in front of an old diner and started asking questions. Nobody looked him in the eye. A waitress pretended not to hear. A gas station clerk laughed and said kids here just wander off. It didn't add up. It never did. So Dean waited. He sat in his truck for hours with a cold coffee and a warm Glock, staring at the street that disappeared into woods behind the auto shop. Then, at 2:17 a.m., he saw it. A white van. No plates. Black tape across the back window. It rolled by slow, careful, like it had been here before. Dean didn't follow it right away. He watched where it turned. An old gravel trail that wasn't on any map. He came back the next day, walking it. Tall grass swallowed his boots. Tree branches clawed at his jacket. No sound but the wind. And then he saw it. A shit. Rusted tin roof. Padlock chained. No driveway. No mailbox. Like it had been buried by time. He stepped closer. A noise inside. Small. Fragile. A whimper. He backed away and called it in. Dispatch routed him to his field office. Protocol. He gave coordinates. Silence. Then a cold voice. Stand down, Mercer. There is no op return to base. His heart pounded. There were children in there. He knew it. He could feel it. He turned off the radio, pulled his sidearm, walked back to the shed. The lock was heavy, but the hinges were weaker. 1 kick, then 2. The third hit, metal screamed, and the door swung open. And everything stopped. 12 children, huddled in a corner. Hands tied, mouths covered with duct tape. Their eyes were huge, terrified. They shrank back from the light like it burned. One boy couldn't stop shaking. A girl had blood dried on her cheek. They looked at Dean like he was a ghost. He dropped to one knee. He whispered it was okay, that they were safe now. But one girl in the middle, maybe 8 years old, shook her head. Her lips trembled under the tape. Then Dean heard it. Leaves outside. Gravel shifting. A footstep. Not his. Not a child's. He turned just as the shadow moved past the window. A figure. Armed. Silent. Dean didn't hesitate. He turned, shielded the kids behind a stack of crates. Raised his weapon. Every instinct in his body screamed ambush. And the kids just kept crying. Dean's finger hovered on the trigger. His breath was locked in his throat. The air inside the shed felt crushed, like the walls had started closing in. Outside, footsteps scraped against gravel, measured unhurried, like whoever was out there already knew what they'd find. Dean backed toward the children, one hand still raised with his weapon drawn, the other reaching for the radio on his shoulder. Static. No signal. He glanced at the kids. One girl silently mouthed a word. Not one. 2. More than one. Dean whispered for them to stay low. Then he slipped out the side of the shed, crouching behind a rusted water tank. The midday sun cast long shadows from the trees, and 2 figures appeared at the edge of the clearing, men in black jackets, moving like they'd done this 100 times. No badges. No hesitation. One carried a silenced pistol. The other had zip ties looped around his wrist like bracelets. They weren't looking to scare. They were looking to clean up. Dean knew he was outnumbered. He didn't care. He waited until they were 6 steps from the door, then stepped out and fired. The man with a pistol dropped before he hit the dirt. The second dove behind a fallen beam, returning fire. Dean felt the air slice past his head. He crouched, repositioned, squeezed off another shot. Silence. Dean moved slowly, gun raised. When he reached the second man, he was gone. Blood trailed into the woods, light staggered. He was hit, but not dead. Dean couldn't chase. Not yet. He returned to the shed. The children flinched as he stepped in, some recoiling, others frozen. He holstered his weapon, held up his hands. It's okay. You're safe. He knelt and began cutting their bindings with his pocket knife. The rope had chewed into their skin. Duct tape left welts on their faces. Not one of them spoke until the last boy was free. He looked up at Dean, voice barely a whisper. There's more. Not here. Other places. They take us in trucks. Only some come back. Dean's stomach dropped. This wasn't an isolated stash. This was part of a system. He asked where the others were taken. The boy pointed to a duffel bag near the door. Dean opened it, burner phones, notebooks, stacks of Polaroids. Children. Dozens. Some crossed out. Some with dates. Codes written in red ink. Times. Routes. Dean grabbed the bag. The mission wasn't over. This was just the opening scene. He herded the kids into the woods, moving quick and quiet, choosing the longest path back to the highway to avoid whoever might be watching. Halfway through, one of the girls collapsed. Dean carried her. No food. No water. The youngest started hallucinating, muttering about basements and dogs and cold blankets. Dean whispered to them the whole way that they were going home, that this nightmare was ending. By the time he reached his truck, his hands were trembling. He called it in again, this time bypassing HQ and going straight to local PD. Ambulances arrived. Questions came. Cameras. Dean didn't say much. Not yet. He turned over the duffel bag to a tech unit, demanded an analysis. While they logged evidence, he pulled one of the burner phones and scrolled through messages. One caught his eye. Drop confirmed. Return route active. Next shipment in 36 hours. New batch 21. Dean's blood ran cold. The kids he saved were just a fraction. There were more. Still in chains. Still waiting. He drove to the field office. No fanfare. No thank yous. He was met by a supervisor, clipboard in hand. No mention of what he'd found. Only reprimands. Unauthorized activity. Violation of protocol. Weapon discharge without command approval. He was ordered to hand over his badge. Dean stared at it for a moment, then placed it on the table. But in his mind, the only thing he saw was that shed. And the eyes of those kids. The case wasn't closed. It was just beginning. Dean didn't go home. He couldn't. The sound of those kids crying still echoed behind his eyes, the way they flinched even when help arrived. He replayed every second from the shed, the ropes, the blood, the silenced footsteps. But it was the burner phone that kept his hands tight on the steering wheel. Next shipment in 36 hours. 21 kids. New batch. He pulled into an abandoned motel 2 towns over, the kind with flickering neon and a single clerk who didn't ask questions. Room 8. No cameras. Dean laid out the duffel bag on the bedspread. Phones. Polaroids. Handwritten codes on receipts and torn napkins. He stared at them until patterns started forming. Same route, same van, same time stamps between disappearances. This wasn't random. It was a system. He powered on a burner again and scanned the texts. Dozens of contacts, all coded with aliases D6, Iron, Caretaker. He tried one. No response. He tried another. A reply came instantly. Drop site confirmed. Eastern track. Coordinates active. Dean typed a single word. Confirmed. Then deleted it. He didn't know where to go next. So he called someone who always did. Malcolm Reyes answered after 2 rings. A name that wasn't supposed to be spoken anymore. Once the Bureau's top analyst, Malcolm had been discharged 3 years ago after uncovering a trafficking ring that led straight to a federal contractor. They silenced him, took his clearance, labeled him unstable. But Dean knew better. Malcolm didn't ask questions. Just said, "You found them, didn't you?" Dean told him everything. Silence on the line for 5 seconds. Then, "They're still running it." "I told them it wasn't over." Malcolm demanded photos of the Polaroids, screenshots of the texts. Dean sent everything. An hour later, Malcolm called back with coordinates. 3 confirmed sites matching the burner's location pings. One of them, an old textile mill, had been purchased 6 months ago by a shell company based overseas. Malcolm said one more thing before hanging up. "If you go in there alone, you better be ready to not come out." Dean was already packing his gear. He arrived at the mill just after dawn. The building sat behind a chain-link fence topped with rusted barbed wire. No guards visible. No cameras. Too clean. He cut through the fence and moved in. Inside, the air smelled like oil and bleach. Concrete floors. Empty crates. But then he saw it, drag marks on the ground. Small. Uneven. Like someone had been pulled. He followed the trail down a narrow hallway to a metal door. He kicked it once. It didn't budge. Then he heard something inside. Breathing. He stepped back, braced, and kicked again. The lock snapped. Dean burst in, gun raised. No kids. Just a chair. And a single photograph taped to it. His picture. Dean stood frozen. Behind him, the door slammed shut. Voices outside. Footsteps. He ran to the opposite end, found a grate, forced it open, and crawled into the dark. He emerged in a side tunnel leading to the woods. His phone buzzed. A new message. "We warned you. Stop digging." It came from one of the burner contacts. Then a second text followed. 21 tonight. If you interfere again, they die. Dean stood in the clearing, heart pounding. This wasn't about evidence anymore. It was personal. He'd been marked. But he didn't back down. He looked at the phone, then toward the rising sun. They were moving fast. So would he. Dean didn't drive back to the city. He couldn't risk surveillance, not now. He dumped the burner phones into a river just outside Lexington and swapped vehicles at an old friend's body shop. No questions asked. He took back roads, avoiding cameras, his mind racing faster than his wheels. 21 kids. Tonight. No backup. No command. No badge. He stopped outside an abandoned ranger station to rest for an hour. He opened the Polaroids again, this time noticing a pattern in the numbers on the backs. Not dates, coordinates. Drop points. His blood ran cold when he matched the latest one to a derelict shipping yard 4 hours away, on the edge of an industrial ghost town called Marlin's Point. He arrived just before sundown. Broken fences. Rusted gates. Cargo containers stacked like forgotten tombstones. No signs. No guards. Too quiet. He moved through the yard, silent, counting steps, scanning rooftops. Then he saw it. A semi-truck trailer backed against a warehouse bay. Ramp down, engine off. A man stood at the edge with a clipboard, talking to another in military boots. No uniforms. No insignias. Dean watched from behind a shipping crate. Then movement from inside the trailer caught his eye. Bare feet. Tiny. Hesitant. A child stepped into view. Dean's heart cracked. Then another. And another. They were alive. All of them. Rope burns on wrists. Duct tape still dangling from their arms. Their faces told a story. Hungry, terrified, silent. He reached for his radio, forgetting it wasn't there. No time for doubt. He gripped his weapon, moved into position behind a stack of pallets. His pulse throbbed in his ears. Every instinct screamed to move, to act. But he hesitated. Then one of the guards slapped the child back into the trailer. Dean snapped. He stepped out. Gun raised. Freeze. The man with the clipboard turned first, amused. "You again," he said. The second guard reached for a weapon. Dean fired. One shot. The man dropped. Chaos exploded. The children screamed. The truck driver ducked. The clipboard man ran into the warehouse. Dean rushed forward, covering the kids with his body. He pulled them one by one behind a steel container. Some could run. Some couldn't stand. A boy clung to his leg, sobbing into his jeans. More footsteps inside the warehouse. Backup was coming. Not his. The kids were too exposed. He needed help. He grabbed one of the radios off the fallen guard, pressed transmit. "This is Special Agent Dean Mercer. I have 21 child victims alive. Coordinates transmitting now. Immediate extraction required." No response. Then static. Then a voice. "Dean?" It was Malcolm. Dean nearly dropped the radio. "Where are you?" Malcolm demanded. Dean gave him the location, short and fast. Malcolm said 2 words. "Uploading everything." Dean didn't understand. Then Malcolm explained. "I cracked the drive. We're live. Everything, photos, texts, locations, names, streaming to every independent outlet. They can't shut it down fast enough." Dean felt the ground shift beneath him. But Malcolm's voice changed. Quieter. Slower. "They found me, Dean." Dean froze. "Don't say that. I bought you 10 minutes. Use them." Then silence. Dean swallowed the lump in his throat and turned back to the kids. No time to mourn. Not yet. He led them, one by one, through the maze of crates and cargo toward the far fence, where he'd cut a gap earlier. Sirens began to scream in the distance. Someone had picked up the broadcast. As he got the last girl through, he turned back for one final scan. A figure stood in the doorway of the warehouse. Dean raised his weapon. Then his heart stopped. It was his supervisor, dressed in plain clothes, watching, expressionless, and not alone. 2 more men flanked him, both armed. Dean stepped in front of the children and didn't move. He didn't need a badge. He only needed one more bullet. He just didn't know who he'd use it on yet. Dean stood frozen, one hand on his weapon, the other gripping the doorframe. The room before him wasn't just a shed. It was a hidden chamber, dimly lit by slivers of sunlight cutting through rotted wood and cracked windows. The air was thick with dust and something else, fear. His eyes adjusted. There they were. Kids. So many of them. Dozens. Tired. Dirty. Weak. One boy near the front whimpered, his cheeks sunken, lips trembling. Dean's throat tightened. They were real. He hadn't imagined this. Every sleepless night, every ignored report, every red mark on his file. It had all led here. "I'm FBI," he said firmly but softly. "I'm here to get you out." Some of the children recoiled. Others simply stared, too broken to react. A girl, no older than 8, had a rag tied around her mouth and tear tracks running down her face. Dean moved slowly, deliberately. He holstered his weapon and reached into his vest for a utility knife. One by one, he began cutting ropes. Then, the floor above creaked. Dean froze. He turned his head, scanning. Shadows moved just beyond the slatted ceiling. Someone was still here. He spoke low into his radio. "Command, it's Mercer. I found them. Alive. But we are not alone." Static. Then silence. No one responded. Dean's jaw clenched. Either he was out of range, or someone didn't want backup coming. He quickened his pace. "It's okay," he whispered to the kids. "You're safe now." As he worked, footsteps echoed from the back hall, heavy, deliberate. Dean pulled the youngest boy behind him and drew his weapon again. The room had no real exits. Just the door he came in through, and a boarded rear window. A loud crack, someone trying the door. Dean raised his voice, commanding, "FBI, stand down." No response. He moved to the center of the room, placing himself between the children and the door. Another crack. Then the lock gave out. A man entered, dressed in a maintenance uniform, face blank, eyes cold. Not surprised. Not confused. Just prepared. Dean shouted, "Get on the ground." The man stepped forward, raising a crowbar. Dean fired. One shot. Non-lethal. The man crumpled, grabbing his leg. Dean moved quickly, secured him in cuffs, and dragged him outside the door. His breathing was heavy. His hands trembled, but he forced himself to stay calm. The kids still hadn't spoken. Trauma like this left invisible wounds. He turned to them, crouching to eye level. "I need your help," he said gently. I can't carry all of you out alone. We have to move together, okay? A few nodded. A small boy reached for his hand. Dean took it. They moved as one unit, Dean leading with his weapon raised. Every hallway was a trap waiting to spring. They passed an old generator, rusted cages, and stained mattresses. A girl stumbled. Dean caught her, lifting her into his arms without hesitation. Finally, sunlight poured in through an open back exit. He led them out. Just then, sirens. He looked up. 3 black FBI SUVs tore down the dirt road toward him. Someone had sent backup after all. Dean didn't know whether to feel relief or fear. As agents spilled out, weapons raised, one voice called out, "Mercer, what the hell are you doing here?" It was Director Haynes. Dean stepped forward, still holding the girl. "I found them," he said. "All of them." Haynes scanned the children. His face turned pale. One of the boys recognized him and recoiled. Dean noticed. So did Haynes. The atmosphere shifted. Dean's instincts flared. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And just like that, he realized. The people who were supposed to help might be the ones hiding the truth. The wind howled through the steel wreckage as Dean held his stance, shielding the children with his body. The supervisor stood just inside the shadows of the warehouse, his face stone still. Behind him, 2 armed men closed in, steps slow, deliberate. No sirens, no backup, no uniforms. This wasn't a rescue. This was cleanup. Dean didn't lower his weapon. His fingers were ice. He could feel the kids trembling behind him. Their breath on his back reminded him what mattered. He wasn't moving. The supervisor finally stepped forward, voice low, almost gentle. "Dean, it's over. You made it worse." Dean's voice cut like broken glass. "You think silence is justice?" The man glanced at the bodies near the trailer. "You just cost some powerful people a lot of peace." Dean's eyes didn't blink. "I'm not here for their comfort. Lumensight. Do you even know how far this goes?" Dean didn't answer. He already knew. One of the gunmen raised his weapon. Dean fired first. The shot cracked through the yard. The man fell. The other dove behind a crate, bullets flying. Dean ducked, returned fire. The children screamed, huddled low. One of the girls began to pray out loud, voice steady despite the gunfire. The supervisor didn't flinch. He turned and walked back into the warehouse, vanishing like smoke. Dean moved fast, using the container walls as cover. He circled left, came around the side, and caught the second gunman off guard. Quick shot. Silence. Then the world roared. A black SUV tore through the broken gate. Tires screeched. Doors flew open. Tactical boots hit gravel. FBI agents. Real ones. Dean lowered his weapon only slightly, unsure. But then he saw a face he trusted, Agent Luis Ortiz from Internal Affairs. Dean had spoken to him once, years ago, about corruption investigations that never went anywhere. Ortiz raised his hand in peace. "Stand down, Mercer. You did the right thing." Dean didn't believe it. Not yet. But he dropped the gun. Ortiz walked to him, eyes scanning the yard. "We got the live feed. Your guy, Malcolm. He uploaded everything. This operation's blown wide open. Every outlet's broadcasting the story. The Bureau's panicking." Dean's voice cracked. "Where's Malcolm?" Ortiz paused. "I'm sorry." Dean closed his eyes, just for a second. Then turned back to the kids. Paramedics were flooding the scene now, ushering children into vans, covering them with blankets, whispering soft words. A little boy gripped Dean's hand and wouldn't let go. Dean knelt and held him. Ortiz came beside him. "This never should have been on you." Dean shook his head. But it was. Later that night, Dean sat in the back of an ambulance, blood dried on his sleeves. Reporters circled the area. Camera flashes. Shouting. A tidal wave of noise. The truth was out now, but justice would take longer. He gave Ortiz the last piece of evidence, the Polaroids, the coordinates, the names written on the backs. Ortiz nodded, tucked them into an evidence pouch. "You know they'll come for you, right?" Ortiz said. Dean stared into the distance. "Let them." A news report blared from a nearby radio. Shocking revelations coming from a remote shipping yard where 21 missing children were discovered alive, Thanks to the actions of a lone FBI agent working off the grid, questions now swirl around Bureau leadership and a possible internal cover-up. Dean finally let the tears fall. For Malcolm, for the kids, for the silence he refused to live with, and for the storm that was still coming. Because the fight wasn't over. It had just begun.